International Legalization of Marijuana for Recreational Purposes by Josh Ross. This speech is titled Legalize It. Smoke weed every day. Recreational marijuana legalization would alleviate the chasm that the war on drugs and institutional racism caused amongst people of color and white people. Marijuana legalization would fit perfectly in our capitalistic economy in terms of revenue that weed would bring in and jobs that weed industry would create. Finally, marijuana legalization would act as another recreational activity that would help bring people together and better unite us as a nation. What if I told you there was once a point in our American history where weed was legal, and the chief factor for its prohibition was entirely racist? Oh, sorry about that. There were two major pushbacks against marijuana in the United States, and they were unfortunately not a result of marijuana's actual medical effects, but as a result of making Mexican people out to be villains. Henry Anslinger was a U.S. government official who served on the Federal Board of Narcotics for 5 presidents, Hoover through Kennedy. Anslinger stepped into this role as a commissioner at a time where alcohol prohibition was coming up on its final days, and cocaine and heroin had already been banned respectively. As a result, Anslinger wanted a drug prohibition that he could spearhead, so he chose marijuana. Anslinger would help to vilify and create fear amongst the crop by also playing on white America's views of Mexican people at the time. Anslinger's campaign was entirely propaganda fueled and contradicted and ignored every scholarly experiment and research that debunked marijuana being a violent drug. These are thoughts and research that Anslinger himself even agreed with at the time. Completely contradicting and disregarding his previous supportive statements of marijuana, Anslinger would soon go on to put into play one of America's first bouts of mass incarceration through institutional racism. Racism has lingered around the United States from the country's genesis all the way until our present day life in the States. Institutional racism is history we can trace all the way back to our country's inception, with the framers of our Constitution leaving out women and people of color when it came to voting, landowning, and many more forms of liberties that our founding fathers went to war with Britain over. During President Richardson Nixon's administration, though, institutional racism would rear its ugly head once again to oppress an entire race of people. Once again, under this time, disguised as the war on drugs. This campaign came down hard on illegal drug users and distributors, giving these people long sentences and no leniency for first-time offenders. For someone on the outside looking in, this doesn't sound too bad, but unfortunately it was. The war on drugs targeted Black and Latinx communities in hopes of gaining a profit of the monetization of private and federal prisons. John Ehrlichman, who served as a counsel and assistant to the president, stated, "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt their communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the weekly news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. Consequently, countless numbers of families, communities, and entire cities have been forever impacted due to the fact the U.S. government's greed and racism."